Welcome to Dynasty Life. I'm Theo Gremminger. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. And tonight's show is going to be a lot of fun because we spent months and months preparing for our rookie drafts. And I'm going to talk to some very sharp drafters about who they actually took, where the money went, and where the OTC decisions went in rookie drafts. And I'm happy to be joined tonight by Dan Williamson, who you know on Dynasty Life. He's been here before. This is your third time in Dynasty Life, Dan. But this is your first time with our friend Austin Martin. And both these guys are from Minnesota. How weird is that for me to be doing a podcast with two guys from the state of Minnesota at the same time? But things just happen because Dan and Austin are two of the better Dynasty managers I know. And certainly if you play Dynasty in FFPC, you know these guys well. You don't want to see these guys in your drafts, whether it's Dynasty, whether it's redraft, but specifically Dynasty. We'll start with you, Austin. Austin, you don't need to say the amount of money and entry fees, but where is your portfolio at in terms of number of teams right now in Dynasty?
Shout out IRS.
Shout out to the, listen, those guys, we've asked them not to listen in to the show.
Leagues, that's all they are, $5 leagues.
We don't need to worry about what the entry fee is. Shout out IRS.
Concerted effort to trim it down. We're at like 45 leagues. About 60K in entries for dynasties. So that kind of, we've got like 250, a couple 500s, and then just kind of spread out between 750 and 5K.
I'm guessing that 250 is an absolute unit for you guys to be holding on to.
It's the first 250 that me and my cousin Andy joined at FFPC. So it's kind of like, it's just one of those things. We've had a pretty good run. I think we won 4 of the last 8. So, yeah, it's good. It's like it's like a sentimental thing or something. But, we kind of hang on to that one. But, yeah.
You love that. You got to keep an old one in the portfolio. And Dan Williamson, everybody knows like you for a player profiler now with your best ball acumen, with the great work you're doing on Stack Hunters. But Dynasty is like your passion. And also you are a highly successful Dynasty manager. Where are you at in the FFPC right now? Ballpark. You don't need to count them.
Yeah, I've got probably 20 leagues total, somewhere around there. So it's a big enough portfolio where I don't have Austin level problems of managing it, and I certainly sympathize with him every time I'm doing free agents and everything else, and rookie drafts. It's a lot. Even 20 is just a lot to keep on top of. So I can only imagine what Austin's been going through, and he slimmed down to 40. So before that, it was even worse, I'm sure. But it's a nice number for me. I kind of keep slowly adding to it, but I also trim one here and there. So it's a slow rise up. It's not too quick.
And unlike these guys, I'll never admit my true number, but I'm somewhere between Austin and Dan. But we'll keep it like Fight Club, guys. You never let anybody know that exact number. That was like a test for you guys. So, guys, I'm curious. Like everybody wants to know your process, but what's the biggest challenge to being a portfolio Dynasty manager? We've had Scott Connor on, and he's talked about sort of his process, and he does it probably a little differently than you guys do. And certainly, he's bouncing around some different formats. Austin, what do you find like the biggest struggle? Is it waivers? Is it lineup setting? Is it roster management? What do you find?
I don't think waivers is the worst in terms of Dynasty. The FFPC format where you've got 20 it's pretty much 20 roster spots on most. You end up having a couple, end of bench guys that you want to hang on to that you wouldn't hang on to in redrafts. So the waivers aren't as trying as redraft. I probably spend 3 to 4 times as long doing redraft waivers as I do Dynasty. So it's really the biggest challenge is in season trying to capitalize on trade opportunities, because once the season starts, you get into the week to week grind, and you're just trying to stay up to speed on everything, So I don't treat the waivers too different, but like I said, you've got a couple extra holds, rookie tight ends that you want to wait and see what happens, where you wouldn't be holding on to those guys in redraft. Um, so when you start to have a high volume of leagues, uh, things happen, value surfaces, and you want to take advantage of those trade opportunities. It becomes increasingly difficult during the season when you have more leagues, naturally.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of the challenge kind of with the roster the roster construction. So if anybody doesn't play FFPC, Austin's referring to the rosters are only 20 players. So certain times your decision making has to be consolidating that roster, trying to get it to a manageable number. And when you say, "Oh, that's cool, I'll have 20 great players." 20 great players is not really that helpful to you because then it shuts you out of waivers certain weeks. And I've had teams like that where you're like, "Oh, I can't bid on this guy because I don't want to cut this very good player." So, I think that there's all sorts of challenges. So some people hear that and they say, "Oh, I love my dynasty league where I can roster 35 guys. This seems easy." Both are challenging when you're going up against hardcore competition. And Dan, how about you? You're also doing a ton of redraft, as is Austin, and I know you guys are big best ball people as well. I'm in the same boat where it's just Wednesday nights, Tuesday nights. It's awful. But Dan, for you, what becomes the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges with waivers is just kind of switching mindsets between the redraft and dynasty. I do all my redraft in a batch, and then I switch over to the dynasty leagues, and I have to kind of just completely change my mindset because it's not only on some of the dynasty leagues it's really almost like a redraft because I'm managing this team to win. And I'm a little bit less concerned about the bottom of my roster. If I can get a player that helps me this week and just advances me a week, that's what I'm going to do. But most of the time, I'm paying at least a little bit of mind to looking forward and all that. And with Dynasty, the tendency for me anyway is to end up a little bit too much team silo. Where it's like one my roster is solid from top to bottom, but not enough star power at the top, and so. Continuing to trade for and move towards consolidating, getting that star power up at the top, where it can really do me some good once I get into the playoffs.
And a follow-up, Dan, would be like sometimes you see the silo. Do you think certain times you maybe miss out by being a little bit risk averse to kind of really push the chips in because you value depth? Is that sort of a problem you're seeing?
At times, yeah, it's not so much that I really value that depth so much. I'm willing to trade it away if I can get a player that I think can be one of those top performers, a hammer, as they say. I'll pretty much do anything, anytime to get one of those hammers because I know that I can pull up depth, especially with these 20-man rosters. There's always guys on the waiver wire, so even if you just need a spot starter for a week or something because you don't have enough depth at wide receiver, you can usually find it on the waiver wire. And usually if you're really doing your waivers weekly and following closely, you can find intriguing guys to put on the end of your bench anytime that you have the extra room. So it's really just a matter of finding the opportunities.
Dan Williamson may or may not have won an FFPC Dynasty League that was high stakes with a little Braxton Berrios a couple of years ago in that playoff waiver wire run. Shout out to Dan, always grinding. Austin, let's start with you on this. When we look at this class collectively as a whole, and you guys put a ton of time in it, and I'm sure you have a couple of these leagues which haven't closed out. I know I have one or two FFPC Dynasty leagues where the rookie draft is still going. It's like, what are we doing here? It's been like 9 days. But most of your leagues are over. If you could know the final stats of any single one of these rookies, who would it be?
Oh, I suppose it would have to be Xavier Worthy since I faded him 100%. Yeah, I mean, I've got a fair bit of Hollywood Browns, so kind of lucked into that a little bit. But yeah, I guess it would be Xavier Worthy, or second would be Brian Thomas Jr., who we fired up ahead of him. So I guess either one would kind of let us know whether we made the right call or not on that one.
No, I love it. I think that there's a lot of people out there, including myself, who hope you're a little bit wrong on the Xavier Worthy fade. But our friend Andrew Schellenberg, shout out to our old partner from the GOAT District with Dan Williamson and I said you talked a little trash when he fired up a little Xavier Worthy so early. So, Austin's, letting people know about it. And we're going to talk to you about Brian Thomas a little later, because I know that's a guy that you're super bullish on. Dan, how about you? If you can know sort of, and you could take this from redraft best ball, Dan, because we're still drafting continually. Like, who's the player where, man, if I really knew his final stats, it sort of opens things up for other people, or, hey, that's the guy I'm going to target at ADP?
Yeah, I think Jayden Daniels is probably my guy for this one. And it's because I am interested in how he does for Dynasty, because I think he will influence, several assets on the Redskins. And then also, I've just got
Commanders, football club, like
Commanders. Sorry,
old school. Yeah,
I am old school.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I've also got bags and bags of them at a very cheap price in the early best ball streets too. So that's something I feel still really, really good about. I just could not imagine why he wasn't rising higher in those, but it is what it is. And yeah, I think he's a very, very intriguing player, and he has a lot to say about how teams are going to do this year.
I love the Jayden Daniels answer, and I agree with you. He sort of corrected the price on best ball, but he's like that guy where we're always looking for a quarterback kind of drafted in like the round quarterback 15, quarterback 18 range. He's creeping up towards QB1 land, but it doesn't matter, because he still is going to have those massive weeks where he can really tilt and potentially give you like a top 6 overall finish as a rookie. Guys, one question that I've been asking a lot of people in the pre-rookie draft process was about a rookie wide receiver finishing as wide receiver 1 overall. We sort of like crashed a glass ceiling last year with Sam Laporta doing it at the tight end position, and you've had 3 out of the last 4 years where a rookie wide receiver has given us like top 6 PPR production. Puka Nacua, then 2 seasons ago, Jamar Chase, and then before that, Justin Jefferson. Are we going to see a rookie wide receiver finish as wide receiver 1 overall within the next 5 years, just a trajectory, or is that too hard of a hurdle for a first-year player to kind of reach? Austin?
Just to clarify, are you saying are one of these rookies going to finish as the wide receiver 1 in the next 5, or will a rookie finish?
Oh no, I meant will a rookie wide receiver finish as wide receiver 1 overall within the next 5 years? It could be this year, but it just it seems like, are we going to get that where it's just going to be one of these guys comes in the league and just breaks fantasy? It seems like we're heading in that direction where these guys are taking on more and more targets, getting a bigger role. And then one stat that I saw today is the Arizona Cardinals salaries for wide receivers were like top 6 last year, and now they're 29th, and they're doing that with Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's like we talked to you about for years the power of the rookie quarterback contract, but wide receiver is so important right now. They're getting these mega deals that I think teams are leaning more into like getting as much out of these guys on the rookie deal as possible. So my question to you guys is, do you think we see it where one of these guys just sort of takes that step?
I mean, I think it would have to be like plus 1,000 or plus 2,000 for that to happen. But, Kyler supported D-Hop as wide receiver 3.
Yep.
His first year in Arizona. I mean, it wouldn't be the craziest thing. It's still a huge long shot, but when I saw the show sheet a little bit earlier, I was trying to think about, what would the line be on Marv or Neighbors finishing as the wide receiver 1 overall within the next 5 years. I mean, that has to be a favorite, right?
Yeah.
For one of those,
no, for sure.
Probably like minus 150 or 200, something like that.
Dan, your thoughts on you think we see it? Austin seems a little
real quickly. I mean, we haven't seen rookie wide receivers drafted in the first 6 rounds of redraft. You have to go back to Jamar Chase coming in as like a 6th round redraft pick. So this is like a total reset.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. We're seeing Neighbors right now in like the 3rd round on Underdog, and we're seeing Marv's like at the 1-2 turn right now. And all these people will kind of pour water on it and say, there'll be something throughout the summer. Maybe Marvin Harrison settles in like a little later in the first, or later in the second, when we get to like main event, FFPC main event, or NFFC primetime season. But you guys know how it is. like the train doesn't slow down. Once the hype starts going, it picks up. It would have to be an injury for him to like lose steam at this point. Neighbors in the third round, I could see him going to the like 3-4 turn area, but not really much lower. Because I do think people are a little bit afraid of that Giants offense, but they're not going to be afraid of Malik Neighbors when it becomes clear of like what he is. But Dan, like your general thoughts on kind of like the trajectory you're seeing rookie wide receivers at.
Yeah, I think Marvin Harrison probably has the best chance to do it that we've really maybe even ever seen. Because otherwise, the real problem with it is it's probably going to be a wide receiver drafted in the first round. And I would guess it would be somebody who, if they're that talented, they'd be drafted very early in the first round. And usually those teams don't have their quarterback settled. So, you're fighting against a couple things because you've got to have that quarterback in place. You've got to have the offensive system in place that will support it. And you've got to have the player that's capable of doing that. So, these are three things you have to have all aligned. To me, I would say I would bet against it every single year at 20-1 odds or whatever. I would bet against it. But if anybody can do it, I think it might be Marvin Harrison.
It's awesome. It's one thing we're going to be looking for. We're going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. as well as a number of these other players that we selected in our rookie drafts after a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by Player Profiler, the Dynasty Deluxe package. The rankings are the best in the industry. It includes strategy mode where you can say, hey, change the rankings to be win now. Oh, change the rankings to be productive struggle. There's also a draft planner to help strategize where you should take players because the draft planner also includes ADP. There's a trade finder where we look up on My Fantasy League and we see trades that are done, including a particular player. Then there's a trade analyzer where you can plug in draft picks, players, and we assign a lifetime value to draft picks out 5 years. The best thing about our trade analyzer, it can't be gamed with volume. And there's mock draft data to see right now what's the market for player X versus player Y, including in the fall when very few mock drafts are happening. And our Dynasty guide, the Dynasty Dominator, would cost you $10 on Amazon, but you get it for free with Dynasty Deluxe, and you get our rookie guide for free, a $25 value. So you get all of that for $45. I mean, it's a great deal.
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. Theo Gremminger with Dan Williamson and Austin Martin. Guys, we saw, let's talk single QB. Let's talk top 2 picks. We saw a chalk at the top. There was no draft, yes or no? No draft you saw in single where it wasn't Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors at the 1-2?
I think we did see, we're in one of our chats, somebody was mentioning Odunze, I think, went before Neighbors.
We saw Neighbors go one. We saw Neighbors go one time.
Okay.
I think our buddy goes by Smoker. Daniel.
Oh, wow.
Landed Marvin too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what when that's a champagne problem when you have 50 dynasty teams. He probably had a few number ones and wanted to shake things up. Is my guess there. But I think, generally like 99% of these leagues, it was Harrison Jr. and Neighbors. And if you're talking about single here, the great decision, and Superflex managers a lot of times had to make this decision as well, was Rome Odunze versus Brock Bowers. And when we're talking about FFPC, we're talking about a 1.5 point tight end premium. And Brock Bowers is already steamed up in best ball, already steamed up in anything. He's going to be tight end 8 when we start doing main events, something like that. So he was there, and then Rome Odunze, obviously a great profile. Love the quarterback connection with Caleb Williams. Love the top 10 draft capital. OTC, Dan Williamson at the 103. Which way did you go when it was head-to-head Bowers and Odunze?
I don't think I had a single 103 in all my leagues, believe it or not. But I would have gone. For the most part, I think I probably would have gone Odunze. I do think Bowers is a great tight end prospect. It's just that those tight end prospects are a lot more difficult to judge. Whereas a wide receiver, it's a little bit easier to see. So if I'd been in a league where I was really hurting at tight end, I'd have probably just pushed up Bowers and gone with that. But all things being equal, Odunze probably for me, but it was really close.
How about you, Austin?
Yeah, so in the one QB, I say start 8 because you've got a kicker in defense. I went Bowers at 103. I just think the positional advantage there, when the starting lineups are tighter, made a lot of sense. If you pivot over to like the triflex format where you got 3 receivers, 2 flex, I think Odunze starts to make a little bit more sense there. We split it up a little bit, more Odunze in triflex than Bowers, but it was kind of roster dependent. One team had Mark Andrews, so that made Odunze a no-brainer, but kind of played it both ways. And if I could rewind, just kind of playing out the process, assuming you hold on to your picks, I like Odunze and Ben Sinnott. I'm going to call him Sinnott because that's what I've been calling him. Makes a lot more sense than say Bowers and Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Legette or a wide receiver in that range. So wish I had thought that through a little bit more in advance because we kind of felt that decision as it came around in one league. But yeah, tried to get a little bit of both.
And I'd say for me, I ended up with a lot of both. I maneuvered myself in a position to try to get those shares early. And I had even one, I planned on really in kind of an even split, but then I had one league where I had a bunch of picks, and I took Odunze at the 103, wide receiver needy team. I had acquired the 101 a while ago, real good deal from last year, where it was Ken Walker ended up getting a 101 and something else. It was just a steal of a trade. But I ended up with those 2 wide receivers, and then I also had the 108. Brian Thomas fell to me at the 108, so I ended up trading with the manager that took Bowers at the 104. I ended up getting Jaylen Wright on top, for a third, an early third as well. So I ended up with a pretty split. It was two guys we were super bullish on. So it wasn't I need this guy here, I need this guy here. And I think, Dan, there's a scenario where both really, really hit. I think there's a scenario where these guys end up being the second and third best player in this draft. So I'm happy to get a lot of those guys. Let's pivot over to Superflex here. Caleb Williams went the 101 everywhere. Now, at the 102, Jayden Daniels or Marvin Harrison Jr., what did you see and which way would you have gone in FFPC, whether it's Triflex, whether it's Superflex? I'll start with Austin.
Yeah, so I think it's close enough to where the Triflex versus Superflex distinction actually matters. In the FFPC Superflex format, you only have 2 receivers and a flex plus the Superflex. That's drastically different than the Triflex where you got 3 receivers, 2 flex. So you're talking about 5 receivers versus 3. So I think Jayden Daniels makes a good bit of sense in their particular setup with Superflex, but in a vacuum, I would take Marv. And the only opportunity that we had to make that decision, we held the 102 and 103 in a Triflex, so champagne problems. Landed
good
both.
Year for that. Very, very good year to have the 102 and 103 in the Triflex.
It's so close, and I felt, this year I felt like there were quite a few decisions where format and roster makeup ended up kind of splitting ties, and it seems like a little bit of a cop-out, but a lot of these decisions were so close that I think that it made sense to operate that way.
Same question for you, Dan.
Yeah, totally agree with Austin there. I think a lot of times this was an interesting draft where you really could kind of pick and choose a little bit based on need in ways that I haven't always seen before. So it was kind of fun. I had 101 in a Triflex, and I needed a quarterback, but what I did was I traded out of the 101 to the 102, and I took Marvin Harrison Jr. just because I also only had one share of him across all my my leagues, I knew this was the only other place where I could get one. And so my idea was, hey, I'm gonna trade back up into the first round with some of my draft capital and get myself another quarterback a little bit later on. So I did take, and then another one that I'm sharing with Andrew Schellenberger, or Andrew Schellenberg. We were at the 101, and we did take Caleb there. We had the quarterback need, so I like that. But I think Austin's exactly right with the triflex. Marvin Harrison Jr. makes a little more sense than Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, 2 Andrew Schellenberg references on Dynasty Life in one show. Make sure you're following him, Clutch Like Shelly, on Twitter. Really, really good follow. Let's talk about Superflex. So, let's say those guys go one through the 103, then you get to the 104, and throw Triflex, Superflex in the same mix here, guys. And for anybody saying what's Triflex, it's just a wide receiver heavy Superflex format that the FFPC has. So, like a lot of leagues, it's a 3 wide receivers. But as Austin alluded to, in the Superflex format in FFPC, you only have to start the 2 wide receivers with the 2 flexes. So Malik Neighbors at the 104, or did you want to lean into one of those 2 quarterbacks, whether it's J.J. McCarthy, whether it's Drake May? Austin.
Neighbors pretty clearly for me. Yeah, I think there was a pretty hard tier break for me after the 104. And then you could put the 105 through 108 in really any order you like. Didn't really have to make too many of those decisions. We were at the 106 a couple times, and it was Odunze Bowers based on having really strong QB play at the top. So it just made a lot of sense to go that way. But yeah, I think the draft really started at 105 in Superflex, Triflex.
Yeah, and that 750 Triflex that we're all in, I ended up having the 7-8, thinking I'd end up with a quarterback for all those months there. And I ended up getting Odunze Bowers, breaking Mike Shope's heart, who was picking at the 109. Shout out to the deep end, Mike Shope and Adam Krautwurst. But Mike was trying to get in there. Sorry, Mike, not going to happen. Dan,
those deals weren't available, by the way.
Yeah.
You really couldn't move out of the 109. I mean, either way, back or up for the most part. It was pretty interesting.
109 was such a tough one for Triflex and Superflex managers because there was so many guys there that were appealing, but also nobody that just grabbed it by the throat and was like, I'm the 109. So Mike ended up going with Bo Nix there. We saw some Xavier Worthy there. We saw some Brian Thomas there. We saw some Jonathon Brooks there. I mean, it was all over the place. Dan, your thoughts on the Drake May, J.J. McCarthy versus Malik Neighbors? No-brainer for you as well?
Yeah, no-brainer for me as well. And as a matter of fact, I saw places where it was Neighbors went at 103 and then Daniels went at 104. So, there were people who were pushing Neighbors even up to 103 in the Triflex.
Yeah, that's sort of my my feeling as well. It's like a great wide receiver prospect versus 2 guys that were good quarterback prospects. I'm going to go with the great wide receiver who would have been the 101 for us almost any other year in single. Let's go back to those quarterbacks, though, the elite ones, Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels. What I thought was interesting was we've seen for years sort of like the Trevor Lawrences, the Anthony Richardsons. Occasionally you see those guys touching the first round in single QB in FFPC, but usually I'd say FFPC managers in single QB are like not really trying to dive into quarterback. It's sort of, you see some kind of fish guys take them at like the 105, but for the most part, it's like maybe the 111, 112, or they fall to the second round. I know I have an Anthony Richardson share on a really good team that I got at like the 210 because my league just could care less about quarterback. But this year was different. Caleb was living in the first round and would never like fall past like the 204. And then Jayden Daniels was always getting taken in the second. I know we're in a chat where somebody mentioned he went into the third and in one of those early leagues, but for the most part, I'd say he was living in the second. We in a league the 3 of us compete against each other in. We saw him go 112, possibly 111. I don't remember. One of the 2. I think the 112. It was Dan Williamson's team. So
it was.
Where were you guys at on your exposure to those 2 quarterbacks in single QB and what were some of the prices you were seeing and willing to pay? Dan, start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I had one team where I needed some help at quarterback, and I also had several picks in the first round, so I ended up going Caleb Williams at I think it was like the 110. I did Jayden Daniels at that 112. Didn't really touch him other than that though, because my quarterback was pretty well squared away in most of my other single quarterback leagues.
How about you, Austin?
Yeah, I felt like the first 10 picks in single QB should have been pretty solid, and then after that it pretty much opened up, and I had no problem with Caleb or Jayden Daniels starting at the 111. We ended up taking Caleb 3 times between 111 and 201. Ended up getting Jayden Daniels once at the 210 in a single QB, which was just outstanding. But I had Jayden Daniels like kind of locked in at like 12th or 13th overall. We had an opportunity at him in one spot, and ended up firing up Ben Sinnott instead. It was a Josh Allen team, so kind of just decided to go a different direction there. But no problem with that value. We were tempted to, even on one of the Caleb teams, it was a Jalen Hurts team. We were tempted to go a different direction and push a running back up, or like a Purcell type. But just looked at it and said, the situation is so good for Caleb Williams. I mean, if he is what he's supposed to be, we can turn around and flip him or flip Jalen Hurts. It's just a stable asset. So you're drafting a piece that's not, I mean, it's like too big to fail type thing. So I think you're in a good spot where you're not going to lose out on that pick. You can turn around and flip them, or flip the other QB that you have. So didn't end up going crazy with them, but got a few pieces.
No, I love the way you said that, and I think that there's a little underrated nature in that, where you're not just drafting somebody to contribute to your dynasty roster, but you're adding a piece that you can use to make those consolidation trades. Or if you lose, let's say your tight end, you lose a running back, get that. So how about the running back position, guys, as a whole? It was Jonathon Brooks and it was Trey Benson, both steamed up sort of into the first round of single, and both of those guys were gone by like the 203 in Superflex, Triflex formats. How much did you get of those two? Who were you firing up first between the two of them? Start with Dan.
Yeah, I got a little bit of Brooks, not so much Benson. I was a little bit surprised at how far Brooks got steamed up, to be honest. I thought Worthy, Brian Thomas, they might be going ahead. Maybe even McConkey or Coleman might be going ahead of him. But, Brooks ended up, looking at Fantasy Mojo, he was at the 105 and one quarterback. I got him a little cheaper than that, but still, it was just there were so few good running back prospects that landed well in this draft that if you had a need, it was just gonna kind of push them up. So I felt pretty good about most of my drafts because I didn't have a big need at running back going in. So I didn't really major on those guys as much. I just kind of let the value fall to me a little bit more. But I did have a couple teams, that were able to, where I had to kind of push them up and prioritize them. And I had a couple teams where I wanted to have somebody fall to me. I couldn't trade up, and and guys were snapping up these running backs. So I ended up getting shut out a little bit and just kind of taking some of those dart throw guys in the late second, third, fourth round.
How about you, Austin?
Ended up with one share of Brooks and 3 of Benson out of, some 40 some odd teams. Seth and I, my partner, had a little bit of a disagreement in terms of, the Brooks-Benson debate. So we kind of split it up, fired up Brooks one in one spot. I think, Theo, you're in that league. He had a need for running backs. We fired him up once at 106. Otherwise, kind of let the running backs come to us. Preferred BTJ and McConkey ahead of the running backs, so just because of that, we didn't end up with them a lot. When Benson fell a little bit to like the 108, 109, 110 range, broke off a few pieces, but otherwise, you had to be a little bit more aggressive with those guys than I expected as well. I kind of thought that the running backs were going to start at like 108. I felt like BTJ, McConkey, and Worthy were going to be sort of locked in, but it wasn't really that way.
Yeah, I think that I'm with you. I didn't end up with nearly as much of these guys, and I've been talking about Trey Benson for like months and months. But when push comes to shove, I didn't end up with as much as I thought because he got steamed up, as did Brooks. And I was not paying anything higher than a 108 in single for either of those guys. I agree with you just because it's like I like the landing spots, I like the players, but there were certain wide receivers I just couldn't take those guys ahead of when they fell. So I was a little bit surprised. I think that the lesson learned for anybody out there is never underestimate the steam for a running back. The running backs are always going to be, especially in FFPC, there's certain formats that are a little less running back crazy, but FFPC is always going to have a manager that's willing to take one of those guys, 105, 106, and never let them fall. And next year is going to be a running back class. There's a number of running backs that are going to be in this upcoming 2025 class. It's sort of going to be like revenge of like the running back drafters next year. So we'll see how those.
I'll just add that I would have been more aggressive about trading back. Knowing what I know now, I definitely would have. I just, I don't know. I don't know what it was. The way I processed it, I definitely thought those receivers were kind of locked. But
I'll say this. I'll say that the one problem with trading back is, like, especially for single QB, you didn't know if somebody was going to take Caleb, and you'd have certain leagues where you get stuck with like a 111, 112, and you're bouncing around saying, I'm going to end up taking somebody here at the 111, 112 that I've already taken at like the 205 in another league. It just seemed like, and you couldn't get out of those picks. Once that top 10 was gone and maybe a Caleb was gone, if you didn't have a team that was in need of quarterback in your league, then people are just going to let you sit on it and make a decision. They're not going to let you off the hook by giving you like an extra third rounder and like the 202. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was just kind of interesting in that range that if you wanted the running back, you had to push him up, because as Austin was saying, you've got basically, 5 starting wide receiver spots, in a triflex or whatever. But there's always a manager in that triflex who's going, no, it's not 5 wide receiver starting spots. It's 3 wide receiver starting spots and 4 running back starting spots. It's like they're just so running back mad.
Bunch of boomers, man.
Gotta have them. So if you've got a couple 3 of those guys in one of your triflexes, the running backs get just really tough to get a hold of. And and of course part of it also is with the roster limit, capped at 20 plus 3 IR spots or whatever. During the season you can always go out there and get that wide receiver who's got a good chance to get you 10, 12 points, and you can pull them off the waiver wire and you can throw them right back on the waiver wire pretty much anytime you want. But the running backs, you've almost got to be a week or 2 ahead of. So, if all of a sudden you get caught short at running back, it's real easy to have a hard time pulling in a running back that you really want to start. And you don't want to make trades during that time of year for a running back because you're going to be paying insane prices for anybody who's any good. So, it does make sense to me why the running backs do get pushed up as much as they do. But on the other hand, it's a little bit frustrating because you see, that the real long-term value is a wide receiver.
And let's stay at the running back position. And Dan, you take this one. Who was your running back 3? And I'll preface this by saying, the top 2 running backs always went top 2, Brooks and Benson. But then we did see a little bit of variance between Jaylen Wright, Marshawn Lloyd, and Blake Corum. And all of those guys were sort of gone by the mid-second round in every format, even Superflex, Triflex. People are just kind of cleaning up that little group because it was a little bit of choice between, like, the top 5 was locked in, but then RB6 had a little bit of like disparity. Some people were pushing up, guys we'll talk about a little bit later. But between like the 3 kind of pedigreed guys that all went in the 3rd or 4th round and all sort of were appealing to drafters, Dan, Which way were you going with that decision?
I ended up pretty much split between Corum and Wright. Lloyd, I just had a hard time getting a hold of because it seemed like every time that I was going running back, he would disappear before I could get to him. It was like he would be the one that goes first out of the three of them in those leagues. Whereas other leagues, I probably had a little bit more of a predisposition towards Corum and Wright just because I have a decent amount of Kyron. I've got a decent amount of Achan. I like how those teams use their running backs. I'm a little bit less sold on how Green Bay is probably going to use their running backs, especially with Josh Jacobs in there. It kind of makes it feel like Lloyd might have a little bit longer ramp than the other two. So, but I would have loved to have gotten a little Lloyd in there.
And Austin, you got a pretty interesting response for this one.
I'm not totally sure what you're alluding to, but I will say, going in, I had Corum pretty clearly behind both of these guys, but it's hard to argue with spot and the draft capital. I mean, those things line up pretty well. I only ended up with Corum in one spot, but it was $2,500 worth, so that worked out okay, and I think I got him at the 204 or 205. Had a hard time getting my hands on Jaylen Wright, but was able to get him at 208 in a single QB on a 5K Mostert team. So, that calmed my nerves a little bit. Moved up for him in one spot on an Achan team. Took him at 204. Where I normally would have took the tight end. So just kind of wanted to, get a little piece of both. Lloyd is the one that kept falling to us. Kept seeing him at 207, 208, 209 in Triflex, 204 to 206 in single QB. So ended up with more Lloyd and Wright than Corum, and that's how I would have liked it. But kind of played the ADP game a little bit with these guys. I mean, they're all very interesting in great spots, but they're contingent plays.
Yeah, I'm with you guys, but I think I'm actually on the flip side where I ended up with the most Lloyd kind of by far, and I don't know if it was necessarily my plan going in, but like you said, Austin, a lot of times when I saw him at RB5, I would kind of maneuver to get him, and a couple times I fired him up. I like him, Dan, in this offense because I don't know the kind of longevity of Jacobs. I think they're committed to Jacobs. I just look at him as a guy that's absorbed so much volume over the last few years. I'm going to have some Jacobs in redraft and some best ball, but long term, I just think Lloyd's a nice fit. He can catch the ball. He can do some Aaron Jones type things. And I think that they've always sort of given another back touches. We just haven't seen the fantasy production because it's been A.J. Dillon. So I think if he gets the A.J. Dillon role, I think Lloyd could do some things. But I just found it interesting because Jaylen Wright, I saw so much steam for, and I like Jaylen Wright a lot, as do you guys. But I saw Jaylen Wright at the 111, 112, 201, 202 a lot. And
it was,
so I mean, I
ended up sitting on some picks, just kind of waiting to see kind of how things were going to settle. Traded up into a couple spots, and I was like, I don't know if I want to fire him, but I want to wait and see if I get him a little bit later in a couple of these spots so I don't have to do that. It was interesting, but a lot of 111, 112 Jaylen Wright, which, for a team's RB3 coming into the year, I don't remember ever seeing that before.
Yeah, and I'll say fourth round running back. We saw, somebody said this to me on Twitter, Roschon wasn't going as high as Wright. Roschon was a locked-in second-round pick last year. We didn't see Roschon in the first, but we saw Michael Carter there. But Michael Carter had literally nobody around him as a fourth-round pick. It was Tevin Coleman was his competition as a journeyman, reuniting with the 49ers coaching staff in New York. And Michael Carter had nobody around him, and Wright is going maybe higher than we saw Carter go. And it's interesting because it's the Mike McDaniel factor, the Miami factor, and the fact that people are not going to get burned again after they passed on Devon Achane and also the fact that it's like Mostert's old, the perception of Devon Achane is going to get hurt again. So it's sort of like a perfect storm for Wright.
They gave up a future third for him, right? Are we giving him credit for a third?
Yeah, that's the Alan Soslowski has that theory that you go by what they traded for him, not where he's actually drafted. So we'll see. You're right. And Wright's a guy that I thought for sure would have gone on day 2. I would have bet a ton of money on him being a day 2 pick. I'm glad I didn't make that bet. But let's talk about the 105, though. So if you're in Superflex, this is the 109. And if you're in a single QB, it's the 105. This was the pick that we were talking about for months, sort of the new tier, and it sort of stuck with that. Austin, which way did you go with your 105s? A player that you kept like firing up, and not necessarily at the 105, but you would have had him at the 105, 109, but you kept firing anytime you got him.
Yeah, I mean, it was Brian Thomas Jr. for us. It was always Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, he was the guy throughout the process. I know, he doesn't have, the production profile is kind of limited to this past year, but, just when I think about a wide receiver 1, a traditional axe, a game breaker type, this is the type of guy that I picture. He went to the combine. He put it all on display out there. He got the draft capital. I think the landing spot is a little bit underrated. Ridley out. BTJ gives the Jags something different than anyone else in that room. So, I know Worthy is kind of the new hotness and all of that, but you look at it and you say, I mean, it's hard to remember now, but there were times where it was pretty frustrating the amount of targets that Tyreek was getting in that offense. Mahomes spreads it around. You still got Kelsey there. You've got other options. Hollywood Brown there. We'll see if Rashi ends up being a contributor or not. But I don't know. This idea that Worthy is going to come in and all of a sudden start getting 10, 12 targets a game, I'm not so sure. So yeah, BTJ was the guy for us.
Well, I'm riding out with you because I have a ton of BTJ, and I didn't have any 105s. I took a Worthy at the 105. I had one 105, maybe 2, and then I had a Worthy when he fell. I had one league where he fell to the 110, and I scooped him up. But Brian Thomas kept falling to the 108, the 109, the 107. I fired him off at one league in the 106. I took him over Ladd McConkey pretty regularly, which is a whole nother conversation to have. I ended up with some McConkey, but head-to-head it was Brian Thomas over McConkey. We talked about the Sunsonic Truth a little bit about my reasoning with that, but I agree with you. It's sort of like DK Metcalf with Doug Baldwin, and Brian Thomas is with Christian Kirk, and it's a situation he can kind of overcome very quickly, and he's got the athletic profile. Maybe you miss on this, Austin, but you weren't paying like a 102, 103 for it. I think it's a very good bet sort of where you took him with his profile. And also Trevor Lawrence has shown he can support, strong wide receiver play now for several years. Dan, you're 105. Which way you went with it? And did you have a lot of it?
Counterpoint.
Go for
Worthy.
There you go.
Worthy.
I'm on the Worthy at the 105, on record. But I'm just saying it didn't work out that way for me. So I have a lot of Brian Thomas, but I'm Worthy's my guy at the 105 as well.
Yeah, so as it worked out for me, not only was I able to get Worthy at the 105, but I was also able to pair him up with Mahomes in a couple leagues. So, that was fun to do. But I wasn't really scared off, because a lot of people were dropping Worthy just because he's fast. And, just because you're drafted in the first round and you're fast doesn't mean that you're a bad draft pick. Because the thing is, even before we knew how fast he was, we were still expecting him to go in the late first. So, I didn't think that any NFL teams were like pushing him up totally based on speed or anything like that. This is a guy who broke out at, 18 years of age. So, that means a lot to me. I do pay attention to breakout ages a lot. His college dominator rating wasn't quite as good as what you might hope, but he also had really good team weights. So I give him a little bit of credit there. and then you add in the speed and the the situation that he's in and all that. I don't know that Worthy's going to knock the top out of it this year or anything, but I think he's a prospect that is going to have, weirdly enough, for a guy so fast, he might have a little bit of a slow burn, but I think he's going to be in a couple 3 years really, really good. So I was more than happy to get as much Worthy as I could.
And then lightning round here. Worthy was your 105, Dan. Who was your 106?
Yeah, my 106 was probably BTJ. I'm less sold on him than you guys are. It just makes me a little bit nervous that it took him so long to fire. And basically he had a big year in an offense that was, just they were forced to air it out all the time.
17 touchdowns though, Dan. He had a pretty good year.
Yeah.
Next to Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, the touchdowns are legit. I mean, that's very, very cool. No doubt about it. And he had a great teammate and everything else. It won't surprise me at all if he hits, but I was a little bit concerned about his route tree as well. It's just not as well developed. He's basically runs a couple routes. Basically a go and a hitch, and that's what he does so far. That's not to say you can't succeed like that. I mean, DK Metcalf started out not really much more than that either. So, I wasn't really like scared off him or anything like that, but I just didn't, with the places where I had that 106 or 107, I ended up going Brooks because of team need rather than the wide receiver in BTJ. So it just didn't work out for me to get shares the way that I thought it might. I had hoped to get, at least a couple, but didn't work out for me.
And Austin, you were mixing up your 106, or did you end up with a kind of consistent?
Similar setup. I preferred McConkey. I never really had to make that decision. In that one league I mentioned, we took Brooks at the 106, but other than that, didn't really. No one ever forced my hand on that. Worthy was always pretty much gone, so never had to really think too much about if I was OTC going to fire McConkey or not. But that's how I had it. I had Worthy at 107 in single QB, so it just wasn't going to happen. And then Brooks and Benson kind of after that. So
let's go with sleeper running back. Did you end up with more Tyrone Tracy or Kimani Vidal? And again, Kimani Vidal, I know Austin, he went at the 202 in the 5K, but those two guys were sort of tethered for weeks here on Player Profiler as like our sleeper running backs, and then Vidal just, sort of jumped the shark, whereas Tyrone Tracy, I was still able to get a ton of in the third round. So where did you end up with more of who?
I was trying to keep it pretty close, but it was the Kimani Vidal exposure was getting away from me a little bit. So I actually fired Tracy ahead of him once just to try and level it off. So we ended up with 20% of each, in the third round of both. So pretty happy with that. But guys, I mean, these are 5th, 6th round running backs. I mean, here we go again.
Oh yeah.
My guilty pleasure here. This is my partner hates it. he plays it a little bit tighter to the vest. Seth, if you're watching, I love you, brother. But so these running backs, man, they're exciting. They've got opportunity in front of them, but we'll see. They're no lock.
Dan, are these guys Terrell Davis, Alfred Morris, or Darwin Thompson?
Man, it could be all three of them. You just don't know. I mean, as Austin said, it's a total crapshoot at this point. You're just buying scratch-off lottery tickets and see what you get. I got a little bit more Tracy than I got of Vidal. If I had my perfect world, I'd have probably had a little more Vidal than Tracy, but that's the way it went. So I found Tracy going consistently later than Vidal, and he was just kind of falling into where I had my picks in my drafts a little bit more.
At cost, Jalen Polk or Javon Baker, which Patriots wide receiver did you end up with, if any? Which one would you kind of bet on? And again, Polk's going to cost you a little more, but not that much more, depending on your league. These sort of guys converged a little bit, and we even saw, we talked about Austin. We've talked about this, the whole double tapping I've seen some sharp people do that. So why don't you take this first?
Yeah, Baker at cost, and for me, straight up. Again, I know this is another. You shouldn't be taking fourth round receivers over second round receivers. This is a good way to go broke. Having a partner can kind of help you balance out some of these tendencies. So, Seth likes Polk. We did the double bet in one of the 5Ks. So I think that's going to work out. I mean, you could have 2 wins there. I didn't end up with much Drake May, but I like that setup for them. Maybe not this year, but, over the next 2 to 3 years, I think at least one of these guys is going to hit.
Drake May had some very positive reports. I know it's early, but tearing it up. All the reporters love him, and this guy's like a folk hero now up in New England. They love Drake May. Talking about his childhood growing up. They're diving into like him knowing Steph Curry, played with his brother on the AU team, and it's some very cool stuff coming out there. A lot of positive vibes. Dan Williamson, are you into either one of these wide receivers? Did you get any?
Yeah, I got some Baker. I didn't get any Polk. I wasn't really pushing to get any Polk. I think Baker ranked a little bit higher. Personally, I'm with Austin. I'm a little bit nervous about the fact that I have a fourth rounder over a second rounder. But I also have like Jalen McMillan, Polk's teammate, ranked over him as well. And so, I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy, but Polk, for whatever reason, he didn't do anything that really made me say, I got to get me some Polk.
So stay with Jalen McMillan.
I also don't think you should put too much stock in the Patriots' ability to evaluate wide receivers and which one they should have selected first. So there is that.
Yeah, that's true. But, and I was trying to balance that out with the fact that, but Belichick isn't there. And, how much of this was Belichick and how much of this was the scouting department, So I was a little bit torn on it. But it certainly made it a little bit easier to push that Javon Baker button and just leave the Polk button alone.
So generally, the tight end position, Bowers we discussed, Ben Sinnott we kind of alluded to. We all like Ben Sinnott. He's steamed up, though. Was there a third tight end that you have seen yourself drafting at cost throughout these FFPC and other format rookie drafts, Austin?
I was trying to get a little piece of all of them. Theo Johnson was the one that was a little bit more elusive. I listened to you and Maddie earlier, and you were kind of mentioning that he was the one that was falling. That wasn't what I was seeing. He was the hardest one to draft. I ended up, grabbing 112.50 of him, but got a little bit more Stover, a little bit Eric All. These guys are tough to evaluate, and they're going to be tough to hold in these formats too.
Very.
So, that's what it comes down to. So I'm not trying to overdraft them because I know with 20 roster spots, you get into week 3, and if these guys aren't seeing the field, it's going to be tough to hang on to them. So, you're going to be playing that chicken game, dropping them, seeing if you can scoop them back up, and doing this whole thing. So, I didn't have a strong preference starting with like the tight end 4. I think it was pretty clear Jatavian. I seen a couple times Jatavian got fired up over Sinnott, but I think there was a clear top 3 there.
Yeah, I didn't see over, but I saw sort of when Sinnott went, there was somebody who would position themselves to get Jatavian because, like you said, I think Jatavian is the guy you're going to hold on your roster all year.
Yeah.
Johnson, I don't know. I wasn't really seeing that. It just shows you once you get past round 3, throw ADP kind of out the window, even mid round 3 on. But Johnson, I ended up with a lot of. I think there's a scenario I hold him all year. All he's got to do is win the job this summer versus Bellinger. I think he could do that. But again, it's a tough bet to make. Dan, who were you seeing? Who were you firing up?
I have just ridiculous amounts of Eric All.
There you go.
I think I'm close to 50% on him. So basically, any chance I had to fire him up, just because it's a little bit of a bet of just that tight end situation there in Cincinnati, that it's not going to be too difficult for a rookie who's showing some promise to rise up to the top of it. I mean, I don't think Mike Gesicki, he's a great athlete, but I just don't think he's that great of a football player, and so that leaves the opening for All. a lot of times, though, and this is a little bit more specific to FFPC. I don't know that a lot of other formats allow you to draft veterans.
Yeah.
But I was taking, Noah Fant. I was trying to grab anywhere that I could. Johnny Smith, just, kind of that's really a lottery ticket. And then Tyler Conklin as well, trying to grab a little bit of him because, there's a couple situations there. Fant is sitting in Seattle where all of a sudden all his his competition is basically dissipated, and he was actually looking pretty good in Denver before he got traded to Seattle and then got caught in this three-way tight end mess that Shane Waldron is always promoting. So I kind of went a little bit more towards the veterans, especially on my teams that are competitive, my teams where I'm rebuilding. I was definitely more interested in the Eric Alls and Theo Johnsons and Cade Stovers and all that.
Any chance Dan has to talk about Noah Fant? He's going to do
Will
that.
do.
So I'm glad, we hit the hour mark and you had to mix that in, Dan. So
I did.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that about you. Austin, who are some of the guys you were firing up?
In those late rounds? I mean, I was finding myself hitting the button on Will Levis, Jelani Woods, these guys like round 5-6 types. You get into round 6, round 7. I mean, you had a few of these undrafted free agents that one of these guys is going to hit.
Who are you firing up off the undrafted free agents?
We got Watson, Schrader, Frank Gore Jr. I mean, all three of these guys are pretty interesting for different reasons. I don't know. You got Sean Payton out there chirping. He wants to be the smartest guy in the room all the time. So, he's going to impose his will one way or the other, whether it's Watson or whether it's Jaleel. One of these guys is going to make the roster. So, which one is it? Can both make the roster? That's the real interesting question. I sure hope so.
Yeah, that would be probably the most exciting. Just get rid of Javonte Williams. We've seen enough of him. Dan, talk about sort of your end game targets. Let's ignore the veterans guys. I found myself drafting a lot of Rasheen Ali because for whatever reason he would just fall. I'm with you. I took a ton of Blake Watson. I think I took him together in one league we're in like the 5th, but I've been continually taking him in the 7th, 6th round when he's there just because he actually has a path. Rasheen Ali was funny though because when we start looking at Derrick Henry, we've been chasing that handcuff for years and years and years. And now we have a 210-pound guy that they took coming off a biceps tear. And his competition is Keaton Mitchell, who we all really like the talent, but he's very slight. And then Justice Hill, who's never done a thing. So I found myself drafting a lot of Rasheen Ali. Dan, how about you for any kind of like rookie dart throws and the end game?
Yeah, same. I had several shares of Ali. I took several shares of Frank Gore. Getting way down there, Louis Rees-Zammit for Kansas City. I took a few shares of him just because, the backup situation behind Pacheco. When Clyde Edwards-Helaire is kind of the default choice there, that doesn't put a lot of fear into you. And having this guy who's, a rugby star and, he's, I don't know. I think he's a good athlete, so I'm interested to see how they use him. I don't know, how it will pan out. Probably won't, but he looked as interesting as anybody to me.
Can I also add that Rasheen Ali is the guy that slipped? That I didn't think he was just going to always be available in round 5, round 6. So I ended up with like over 30%, and he really wasn't on my list.
Yeah, it's funny how these things go. It's sort of the best ball market, or however they come up with that early ADP, and he was just so buried that some people don't scroll down. We had that a couple years ago in these FFPC drafts with Tyrion Davis-Price, who, like, just whatever reason he'd slip, and you felt so smart, didn't do anything. We'll hope Rasheen Ali does a little bit more for our rosters. Well, we don't want anything to happen to the big dog, though, this summer. That's going to be a fun storyline. Guys, let's finish out. FOMO. Who's the guy that you didn't get any of, that you wish you had some at this point, and, don't have a whole lot on your rosters?
I got 0 Adonai Mitchell, and I didn't plan it that way. Mentioned it in the pre-show. It was just a guy that, it was always someone else, just someone I liked just a little bit better. One of those running backs, Marshawn Lloyd, Jaylen Wright, Benson Knott. I was always taking one of these guys. So Adonai Mitchell, he's the guy that I just missed out on, and it wasn't by design.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was sort of like he would just kind of go a little higher than expected. Someone was firing him up at like the 205, 206. Maybe you were taking a Marshawn Lloyd, and then it just never sort of happened for me either. I'm very light on Adonai Mitchell. If he ends up becoming a thing, that's going to hurt me. Dan.
Yeah, the one spot on Mitchell where Shelly and I were going to take him, we ended up trading that pick to you, Theo. It was the 212 for a future second. So.
Oh yeah, and I fired up my only Xavier Legette share there. We didn't even talk about Pearsall and Xavier Legette, but we made a trade where it was sort of like it's a triflex format. I don't have any Xavier Legette. I even told you guys there's a guy I need to catch up my exposure to. Shelly was happy to get that offer, and I'm happy to have one share there at the 211. So. Milkshakes can be shared, Dan. You don't have to win every trade.
Exactly. And who knows? Maybe you will. We've still got our pick next year. Whatever it is that we get from you. I don't know if it'll be an early, mid, or late second. I didn't even look that close. I was just like, hey, a 212 for a future second. That's a trade. Unless there's somebody that's really compelling to me at the 212, which both of us agreed there wasn't anybody super compelling. That's a trade I'm probably going to make, and just hope that something bad happens, and it ends up being the 202, 203, 204, something like that. Probably won't be with your team, but
that team's going to be a late second. Let's be honest, Dan. That team's coming together.
It seems very likely that will be the case, but you don't know, so it's always worth a shot. The one we were talking about this pre-show between the three of us, but I didn't end up with any Keon Coleman, and it was not anything that I intended or anything like that. It was just there were certain, where I had him available, I had, a much more pressing need that I had to fill. So I just didn't get to him. And then other places he just, he went before me or whatever, just didn't happen. So I am kind of bummed out about that.
Well, guys, this was awesome. This was like a really, really fun conversation. And hopefully if you have not had your rookie draft, listening to these guys really helped you out in your process. And if you have your rookie draft, maybe you want to try to play catch up and kind of get a little exposure to some of these guys. Austin, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter or X these days. Austin R. Martin 84.
And are you doing any startups coming up, Austin, if people want the smoke?
I'm sure we'll get busy here this summer.
And you can use the code Underworld for $25 off your FFPC, and you're going to need it if you step in the streets with Austin. But by all means, we highly recommend jumping in. It's a great format to play in. Again, code Underworld gets you $25 off. Dan, where can they find you? Stack Hunters this week. What are you guys doing?
Actually, I'm out of Stack Hunters this week because I'll be heading on vacation again for a short trip out to DC. But Bradley's going to have Adam Troutwurst on there, so that's awesome. Going to be a fun show. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to that one. So and hopefully Adam doesn't take my spot permanently, but.
No, I highly recommend Stack Hunters. Bradley and Dan are putting out just tremendous best ball content. I'm sure we're going to be doing some redraft stuff together. Look for Dan and I to do some live FFPC high stakes drafts as well. We're going to do those this summer. Dan and I are splitting a number of teams this year, but highly recommend all of Dan's articles. Highly recommend anytime you get a chance to listen to Dan on a podcast, you will become a better fantasy manager because of it. And stick with us here at Dynasty Life. We're going to be doing shows every single week, all summer long, helping you get your Dynasty rosters in place that you're going to crush your league mates and win a lot of money and win some titles this year. We'll see you soon.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.